Good.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started then, and we'll see if we can get through it. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. It is 1:01 p.m. on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and this is the scheduled time for the workshop regarding proposed changes to Chapter 571 of the Nevada Administrative Code. This workshop is being held virtually via Zoom using either computer or telephone to ensure all wishing to participate may do so. The workshop has been properly noticed and is being recorded as required by Nevada Open Meeting Law. My name is Doug Ferris, and I'm the administrator of the Division of Animal Industry of the Nevada Department of Agriculture. The following staff members of the Department of Agriculture are present for this workshop. We have Julia Miller Ketchum, who is our admin assistant 3, Dr. Amy Mitchell, state veterinarian, Laura Morrow, animal disease laboratory supervisor, and Dr. Keith Forbes, veterinarian diagnostician. And at that point, I'll turn it over to Julia for some of our housekeeping stuff, and then we'll move forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to share my screen here. Maybe. There we go. Let me go through. Doug, can you see that screen? So, let's see.
I can see it. We're just seeing the left side as well. If you just go into slideshow, I think we're good. Either way.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for. So all participants have been muted upon entry, and during the presentation, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. Please raise your hand if you have questions or concerns. And we'll move this guy over here. We have muted everyone to reduce background noise. For those participating via phone, you can raise your hand during the public comment periods or the question periods by pressing *9. Then you can unmute yourself when called upon by pressing *6. If you have any technical issues, please turn the video off to see if the connection improves. Leave the video meeting and either try to rejoin or call in using the phone number and login information from the agenda. If you are having problems getting unmuted or into the comment queue, please use the chat function to make your comment, and it will be recorded for the record. In addition to public comments during this workshop, interested parties are welcome to submit written public comment and email to animalindustry@agri.nv.gov. Since there is no sign-in sheet as there would be at an in-person workshop, we'll be using the participant list. If we are unsure of your name, we may send you a chat so that we have the correct information in the meeting minutes. If you're joining us via phone, please send an email to animalindustry@agri.nv.gov indicating you participated in today's workshop, or remain on the line after we close so that we can capture your information for the meeting record. From our agenda, you will see that we'll start with a period of open comment for anyone wishing to speak on concerns or to provide feedback. We ask that you limit your comments to the 3 minutes to ensure everyone can be heard and save questions for the next portion of the meeting. Following open comment, we will review the proposed changes to NAC 571, followed by time for input, questions, and clarification. After questions, there will be another period for additional public comment on the workshop hearing. Those who wish to speak during public comment are requested to use the hand raising feature, and when called upon, identify themselves by name and any affiliation for the record. Again, please save your questions for after public comment at the conclusion of the review of the proposed changes. There will be time for questions and dialogue at that point, once all information has been shared before we move into the next round of public comment. We will now open public comment.
This is Candace Wines. I would like to comment, and I don't see an option to raise my hand. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So for public comment, I had a few things. We own a cattle ranch here in Ruby Valley, Nevada. And some things I would like to be considered as you guys go through these proposed changes would be, number one, was there a survey done of all the cattle producers in Nevada before this change was implemented? If not, I would like to see that. Number two, I want to bring up an issue that's going to come up with mandatory trick testing. We purchased some bulls recently from Nebraska, and they are unable to get the test part of what they need. Their vet can't get it to do the trick testing. So our bulls have been now held up. We can't get them here because the trick tests aren't available. So that's going to be an issue, especially if we're mandating this on everyone in the state. And number three, we can't get vets now to come out. Large animal vets are very few and far between in Nevada. And it's very difficult for us to schedule a veterinarian now. How are we going to deal with that when everyone is needing a veterinarian for trick testing? So those are my comments. Thank you for your time.
John Griggs, I see that you have your hand up. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. John Griggs with Nevada Cattlemen's Association, providing comments as president. We have potential edits for the regulation for more than just the trick regulations, which we're happy to share with you. Thinking only of trichomoniasis. In 2018, at our annual convention, we had a forum discussion about trichomoniasis, and from that, we sent the department a letter asking for 561 to be reopened, and offered suggestions on how to make that regulation more effective. So we're happy we're here now. But some things to keep in mind, we think, are that, number one, regarding trichomoniasis, it is not a human health issue. It's a livestock specific issue, and regulation, any regulation would be to protect industry and protect commerce. So it should be looked at as such, and any regulation, either existing or modified for trichomoniasis, should be looked at like that, and it should be as least burdensome on industry as possible while being effective. And we desire that regulation to be as effective and clearly worded as possible to avoid any misinterpretation. Finally, we are believers in the workshop process. We know that the best way to get a regulation that's going to work for the most of our producers will be through the workshop process. We do not feel like that 1 or 2 Zoom meetings is going to do it. It should be done like it was last time, where it's regionally and in person. Thank you.
Doug, that's all the hands that I see up at this time.
Okay, and then we received 3 submitted comments, so I'll go ahead and go over those as well. get them up here. The first one is to whom it may concern. My name is Susan Tamara. I am willing to place my comments, or I'm writing to place my comments on the proposed changes to the trick test regulations. I'm opposed to the overburden on cattle producers already stressed in the current economic conditions of the last 2 years and current inflation of these months. With the cost of the test being absorbed by the producers, $60 to $100 pre-bull, the logistics and another burden for these producers. I'm also frustrated at the choice of the forum for the meeting. The state should realize that most of the communities that this bill affects do not have dependable internet, less alone the time of the season this meeting was planned. With calving in full swing and some producers already turning out, a community meeting where producers could have a face-to-face is the best forum. Thank you, Susan Tamara. And then I have
Tamara, that should be Tamara.
Tamara. All right. Thank you, John. Apologies. All right. The next one we have is dear to Department of Agriculture. We're not in favor of the mandatory regulation concerning trick vaccinations. We're not opposed to trick testing if needed, but many ranches do not run in common with anyone and should not be mandated to automatically test their bulls. Why not stay with the regulation you have now, which seems to be efficient? We feel mandating another regulation is not the answer because it does not apply to all outfits. Thank you for considering our views on this important subject. Sincerely, Sean and Angie Mariluch. See. Then I have one more that was submitted. This was a 15-page document that was submitted to us with signatures on it. I'll read what the beginning of it. It was for Nevada livestock owners and producers. It's dated 2019. We as Nevada cattle producers are opposed to mandatory yearly trichomoniasis testing in Nevada. A regulation for mandatory yearly trick testing of bulls is being proposed with possible fines of $1,000 per bull and/or not providing brand inspection for producers who do not comply. Testing will cost from $25 to $80 per bull per year. In the last 6 years, 99.2% of Nevada bulls tested have not been infected. Data provided by the Nevada Department of Agriculture. In parentheses, Nevada currently has trick regulations that are not being enforced. Infected areas can be cleaned up with the enforcement and possible modifications of the existing trick regulations. Therefore, there is no need for burdening producers with another costly government regulation. And that's what I have for the 3 public comments that were submitted via email, Julia.
Thank you. Jennifer, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself.
I appreciate it. I apologize for being a little late to the meeting. My name is Jennifer Pedigo. I'm the executive director for the Nevada Veterinary Board. I just had a small comment in terms of the veterinary technician element of the testing, and I would be happy to work with your department or anyone who's actually working with the language. We just had some concerns regarding the diagnostics of it and signing of certificates without necessarily calling out supervision to verify any diagnosis because it is a prohibited act for a vet tech to diagnose in the state. So I'd be happy to work with the department or lend any modifications that we could provide as well to clarify that. Thank you.
At this time, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so we will turn the time over to Dr. Mitchell for review of the proposed changes.
And Julia, while you're loading that, I'll just try to, just so everybody knows, we're going to go ahead, what we've done through some of the other proposed regulations. Dr. Mitchell's going to start at the beginning and go through and just present what changes we have. Once she finishes that, so we won't open it up to comments or questions or possible changes that industry would like. until we get all the way through the document, then we'll just come back to the top and then we'll work through it with everybody and try and make sure we cover everything on this and everybody gets their voice heard. So
We
with
do
that,
have one more hand that just went up, Doug. Sam.
okay.
Sam, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, just an observation here early into the meeting. There's a lot of complexities and a lot of variety in opinion here. This is a very difficult setting and venue to be able to address these important issues. So I would rather get through today's process, and then as we move forward, look at the possibility of a sit down in correct locations around the state where we can work out more detail on this. This is a good opportunity for us to identify some people's concerns, and then as we move forward, we need to sit down around a table and roll our sleeves up and work through these toward a solution. And just one comment as far as the correct approach on the way this program, the way it's sitting right now, is going. That's the reason that we're here today, is because the current program is not working for trichomoniasis. So that brings us to where we're at today. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Mitchell, just let me know whenever you're ready for me to advance the screen for you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to start with my glasses on because this is tiny type. I'll just highlight the corrections starting with 571030. We added the language approved by the department to describe the test to reflect any new technologies that may come out to allow for that going forward. And then under 2, for breeding rams 6 months of age or older, again, we add on a test approved by the department because there is a new test becoming available. So we want the flexibility to be able to accept more than one test if it's approved for that disease. And then going down to the bottom, under cattle and bison, related to cattle shipping or originating from Mexico. Mexican origin cattle shall be branded with the letter M on the upper right hip or similar permanent brand as approved by the department. Currently, they don't tattoo on the jaw anymore, so this just reflects the current status. And if it changes in the future, we would want to be able to accept that as well. Under 3, all rodeo, thank you. Under 3, all rodeo steers and or Mexican steers used in a rodeo, roping, exhibition, or similar timed event shall be tested for tuberculosis on an annual basis after entry into the United States. Testing records shall be in possession of any owner, manager, agent, or representative in possession of rodeo cattle at all times. Testing records shall include all official ID numbers which coincide with the rodeo and or Mexican cattle in possession. Number 4, official Mexico ID ear tags must be retained after entry into the United States. That reflects the federal law. Official ID must be individually listed on the CVI for all Mexican cattle or rodeo cattle of any age. Only steers and spayed heifers may be imported into Nevada. Mexican origin cattle must not be co-pastured with any other livestock. For 571065, this just reflects the law that went into effect in 2019. We don't allow the importation of elk or deer or cervidae, so they're on the prohibited list. That was all struck to keep up with the current regulations already in place. 571080, we just amended 3 months to 12 weeks to make it more clear and to be consistent with what the rabies compendium reflects for dogs and cats for vaccination. 571095 for transportation of livestock. We did add as directed or as directed by the department. This is specifically indicated to adjust for disease states that may affect when we want to have animals looked at before they're imported. It also reflects the potential in the future to accept a 6-month travel passport for horses, which I know has been a big concern for the state as well. We also added for livestock being transported only within Nevada unless directed otherwise as indicated by an epidemiologic investigation or quarantine order issued by the department, just to reflect that quarantine orders require no movement on or off premises. 571105. A person may not or shall not ship, transport, or otherwise move an animal or livestock into Nevada for sale, show, fairs, or other public exhibit. Again, just to reflect current law that we use animal and livestock interchangeably. 571120 is the added NAC. Quarantine imposed if no certificate or permit is issued. Animals or livestock entering the state of Nevada without a valid certificate of veterinary inspection or other approved certificate and a permit, if required, shall be held in quarantine at the risk and expense of the owner. NAC 571130 was also added for emergency use, so emergency importation of livestock. In the event of a natural disaster, fire, or similar emergency evacuation incident, the department may temporarily waive entry permit requirements and allow the approved shipment to be imported into the state. All animals in the shipment must travel directly to a location approved by the department and shall be isolated from other livestock and remain under immediate quarantine until released. Under NAC 571300, we added the language veterinary biologic or other biologic product to again reflect the current federal language. And that pertains to use as diagnostic agents or used in the prevention of treatment of diseases of animals or livestock, again, reflecting both, unless it has been approved in accordance with the permit or license. 571310 under 5. Any vaccine, bacteriological, or biologic product that could present a hazard to animals or livestock or to the livestock industry of the state as determined by the department. That again reflects the 9 CFR law that allows the individual states to decide what they want to import or not import into the state. And then 571355 under vaccination of female cattle or bison before change of ownership. Number 2, female cattle or bison that are more than 12 months of age must be official Catherine vaccinates regarding brucellosis. We just changed the language to make it more clear before any change of ownership occurs. And 3, we added Nevada does not allow adult vaccination, which we do not currently, and that just needed to be language put in to make that more clear as well. Under 571390, again, we added language saying test approved by the department to reflect any new test technologies that come out in the event that we do want to take or accept another test in the future. And then under trichomoniasis, much of the language here, I added trichomoniasis instead of trichomoniasis just to reflect the current medical description of the disease state. Under 571608, we clarified to be free from infection with trichomoniasis by an official laboratory. Again, further detailing that language so it's clear. Under 571612, this language should be changed in the future. We are going to remove culture going forward because there are some differences in problems with PCR versus culture for testing, and we can go over that. But the references to culture will be changed in the next iteration of this language. But again, we changed trichomonas infection to just saying trichomonas organisms because the new test technologies don't test for organisms per se, they test for the actual DNA or RNA. And then also detailing positive for trichomoniasis infection. Again, just improving the language to make it more current. 571616, again, language improved to make it more current, saying trichomoniasis instead of trichomoniasis. That's repeated in 571618. And then under 571620, positive test result defined. Again, defining that language to be infected with trichomoniasis by an official laboratory instead of saying finding organisms. 571632, again, language updated to reflect the current disease state, which would be trichomoniasis instead of trichomoniasis. For 571634, we just clarified language saying sexually intact cattle, not necessarily sexually active cattle. 571636, again, improved upon the definition of trichomoniasis. 571640, again, improved on the language to reflect trichomoniasis instead of trichomoniasis. And then 571641 is the annual testing requirement. The trichomoniasis testing season begins on September 1 of each calendar year and continues until August 31st of the succeeding year. All test eligible bulls entering or located within the state of Nevada shall be tested negative for trichomoniasis prior to being allowed access to female cattle, or by April 15 of each trichomoniasis testing season, whichever occurs first, except A, bulls that are turned out on public grazing allotments shall be tested for trichomoniasis by April 15th of each trichomoniasis testing season, or 45 days prior to turnout on a public grazing allotment, whichever occurs first. B, bulls consigned directly to a qualified feedlot for finished feeding for slaughter or directly entering slaughter channels are exempt from testing requirements. 571642, again, updated the language for trichomoniasis, and then also defined those test eligible bulls that have specimens taken within 60 days prior to entry and have not had contact with female cattle from the time of test to the time of import, just to make sure there are no false positives based on re-exposure. We updated the language to reflect certificate of veterinary inspection, which is what is currently used, but the former language was health certificate. And then again, updated trichomoniasis language to reflect the current disease state. We also included on this language under number 2, bulls that have tested positive via individual PCR for trichomoniasis in each of 2 most recent tests before entering the state, and each such test has performed at least 1 week apart and complied with the official program to test for trichomoniasis in the state of origin of the test eligible bull. So we're including that individual PCR element, which updates the test modalities offered now. 2A, again, just updated trichomoniasis instead of trichomoniasis. Under 571644, again, just updated the language for trichomoniasis. Under 2A, added the individual PCR test for commuter bulls received in their last 2 most recent tests for trichomoniasis, performed at least 7 days apart. And again, language updated for the disease state. 571646, updated the language again to reflect trichomoniasis instead of trichomoniasis, as we did in 571648. And then we also added under A, any untested bull originating from an infected or exposed herd is subject to a quarantine or hold order and must first comply with the conditions of the quarantine or hold order. 571650, again, updated the language. That's repeated again in 571652 and 654. We added the language or their designee as far as who completes the epidemiological investigation, because that would usually be the state veterinarian or a accredited veterinarian in coordination with the state veterinarian. Under 571656, in addition to updating the language for trichomoniasis, we also added that each test eligible bull in the infected herd has to receive the first of 2 official tests via individual PCR. It previously said 3 because of culture. Again, PCR is more effective test, so 2 are necessary instead of 3. Updated the language again under B for trichomoniasis, and also added the language or enters a slaughter channel within 30 days of a positive test to reflect the current regulation. And then we went a little bit further up. Yeah. And then added under 2, where are we at here? 2A again, 2 tests with individual PCR on both tests instead of the 3 for culture. Tests collected 7 days apart. And then we did edit for heifers that are 20 months of age or older. We reduced that to 12 months of age or older. And then under 4, the owner or lessee of an infected herd may consign. We just changed the language to make it more clear. They're not being released as they would be from a hold order. They're just consigning, selling, or transferring ownership from cattle for cattle. And then we added at the bottom, all cattle from an infected herd and entering a slaughter channel shall remain under quarantine until moved to slaughter. All infected cattle being moved from the premises of origin to a slaughter channel shall move on a VS 127 form issued by an accredited veterinarian or a state or federal health animal official. As a condition of release of hold order, the director may require additional testing within 1 year of release. 571658, again, language is updated to reflect trichomoniasis as the correct disease state. We clarified language throughout the document, including sort of determines that, identifies that a herd has been at risk of contact with an infected bull. And then again, under number 3, we added the individual PCR to reflect the current test modalities available versus the culture, which would have required the 3 tests. And again, to reflect what we did above, we changed the age for any cow or heifer that is 12 months of age or older versus the 20 months that was previously written. And then again, updated the language to reflect consigns instead of the word release. 571660, duties of owner of herd of qualified feedlot regarding bull receiving positive test result to an official test for trichomoniasis. In addition to updating the language, we also made a notice that previous language included a V brand that we have not used and haven't had access to, and it's difficult to utilize in the field. So we updated to is identified by a method approved by the department, including but not limited to a special brand, VS 127 form, brand inspection notation, or similar documentation to signify that it is infected with trichomoniasis. And that's more reflective too of other states that are allowing different forms to be utilized to allow for interstate commerce. Under B, we added the language, all infected cattle being moved from the premises of origin to slaughter channels shall move on a VS 127 form or other documentation approved by the department, issued by an accredited veterinarian or a state or federal animal health official. Again, to replace the V brand that used to be the language written. Again, updated to reflect trichomoniasis as a disease state, and made a notation to make sure that segregation of the bull from all female cattle was included instead of just saying every breeding cow and heifer. 571662, additional testing after a bull receives a positive test result to official test for trichomoniasis. Again, updated the language to include, again, saying being infected with trichomoniasis instead of saying contains trichomoniasis organisms, to reflect the current test modalities, as well as infection with trichomoniasis, and added the individual PCR to reflect the current testing options. And then at the bottom, where it states, as a prerequisite to exercising this option, the specimen must arrive at the laboratory within 48 hours. We changed that or added the language, a time frame and condition designated by the department as to allow for an official test after being found to be infected with trichomoniasis. And this also reflects the newer testing options available and coming out in the future that may change our testing protocol. We would be able to allow for those in the future. Under number 2, again, we added PCR testing instead of what was written previously where it said polymerase chain reaction testing. And then going down, updated the language again to reflect trichomoniasis. And then 571664, under A, regarding handling of a specimen collected from a bull, arrives at an official laboratory for testing within, and we added the language, a time frame and condition designated by the department as to conduct an official test, again, to reflect new testing technologies that are coming up that we want to be able to utilize and allow our producers to utilize. 571666, under official laboratory duties of operator, we have changed that to a biennial inspection instead of an annual inspection. And the language reflects that. And we also are going to allow administrator or designee to maintain its status as an official laboratory so it can complete those inspections as needed. NAC 571-667, diseased animals was added, limitation of transport and transfer of ownership. 1, any owner, lessee, or manager of animals or livestock that are the subject of an epidemiologic investigation, hold order, or disease quarantine by the department shall be denied brand inspections or other services as directed by the administrator or state quarantine officer. And then number 2, any owner, lessee, or manager of livestock who does not meet the annual requirements set forth in NAC 571-641 shall be denied brand inspections or other services as directed by the administrator or state quarantine officer.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for reviewing the proposed changes. We will now take any questions regarding the proposed changes to NAC 571. A quick reminder, please use the hand raising feature to be called on. Be sure to state your name and any affiliation for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. As a reminder for anyone who has joined on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and once you've been called on, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. It appears that we have some that have already raised their hands, but we also have a couple of questions. Let's see. Leanna said the V brand is being removed with questions behind it, question marks.
The V brand, I'm not even sure when that was last available. We haven't used a V brand for quite some time. So the goal is we want to be able to label these bulls, but to get a V brand out to everyone and to institute that would be, not saying it's impossible, we're leaving that open that we could use that, but there's also states that have implemented certain specific forms to travel with that bull so that it follows the bull where it goes, and we know that that bull made it to slaughter. And so if that's more efficient and easier, especially in the field, if we have a positive, we want to be able to allow for that program. If we want to do a brand coming in the future, this would also allow for that, but we don't want to limit ourselves and end up not being able to follow those bulls in a more efficient way if it makes sense for industry.
Okay. Doug, do you want to take any questions that have hands raised, or do we want to start at the beginning of the Word doc and start working through that way? How do you want to do this?
I think it might be easier for everybody if we just go back to the top, and then if we can address, I mean, I want to make sure we address everybody's questions, but it's going to be hard for us to jump around through that document as well. So I think if we can go back to the top and start there, and then make sure we cover every change or every section, and then if anybody has input.
Okay. Do you want me to take the 2 hands that are raised at the moment, or? Yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll start fresh again, please. Okay, perfect. Candace, I see that your hand is raised, so you're welcome to go ahead and unmute yourself. And
yes, I just had a couple of questions come up during the presentation. One was, how are we going to deal with, my understanding is the trick tests have to be shipped overnight, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have to do shipping overnight from our area, it's extremely difficult to get that done. We're in a very rural, remote area. So that's question number 1. And plus that's going to be like crazy expensive. And my second one is, how is the state going to keep up with all the testing? And that's all I had. Thank you.
And I would say that there's 2 possibilities. So yes, I understand the shipping can be an issue, and that's why we left that open on that that language, because there are new technologies coming out that would not require that overnight shipping. And so we're trying to allow for that as well. And then 2, we have been able to keep up with trick testing, with the exception of, I know the supply chain has caused some issues, and we've experienced that as well. But we do have the capacity to do the trick testing. There aren't that many producers or veterinarians that are doing culture any longer. And it's taking resources from the lab to do the cultures also. That's actually more labor intensive. And then keeping track of all that data is also labor intensive. So it actually free up time on our end if we weren't doing cultures.
Jennifer, I see your hand is raised if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, this is Jennifer Garrett, and I have questions. Why are you adding mandatory trick testing to your current regulations? What is your goal? Another question is, I see you've changed some of the current regulations to strengthen them. And why don't you just go with those changes instead of, once again, adding on the mandatory annual trick testing? Another question, how did you circulate the notice of this meeting? 99% of the producers I talked to about these proposed changes had no knowledge of them or this meeting. This means that the producers that have to comply with these changes have not even had a chance to comment because they have not been notified. And the final question is, who makes the final decision on these proposed changes? The state vet, the board, or the director? And what NRS rule dictates who actually makes the final decision? That's all I have. Thank you.
I can start with the first two. So the goal obviously is to reduce our trick problem in Nevada. Compared to adjacent states, we have more issues for different reasons, but we definitely have high numbers of trick. And unfortunately, those animals end up in other states, and then we hear about it from that direction too. So the ultimate goal would be to reduce the numbers, find out who's positive, get rid of those bulls before they are infecting neighboring herds, adjacent herds, before they make it to a sale, and making sure we can reduce those numbers. And yes, we have seen that with current regulations and putting those into effect. But unfortunately, many of the owners that end up under a quarantine or under an exposed hold order oftentimes aren't the ones that brought the open cows in or the bulls in. And so we're trying to make it so that if everybody's a good steward of the industry and making sure we're all doing our due diligence, getting rid of those trick bulls, we will have an ultimate lower number statewide. And we'd be a friendlier neighbor to our adjacent states that we share grazing allotments with and pastures with. The second question was also, you have to refresh my memory, I'm sorry.
So as far as putting the teeth in the current regulations, why don't you just leave it at that?
So yes, so we have noticed that would help a little bit, but there's still pockets of trick that we might not get to. But if we have annual testing, that's how we find out a producer has 1 or 3 bulls positive before we end up with a herd that has 15 positive, is now infected 5 of their neighbors. So the goal of the annual trick testing would make sure that everybody's testing at the same time. We basically have the same testing season so that we know when everybody's positive, and ideally we're getting those positives out of circulation before they're turning out on grazing lands. And unfortunately, the only way to do that is to annually test.
And you realize that putting a clean bull out on dirty cows, you'll never eradicate trick.
I agree. Open cows is a whole nother section of problems. I 110% agree. But unfortunately, we do have owners that are putting dirty bulls out, and they have broken fence lines. They're sharing grazing allotments with other owners who are being judicious with making sure their testing is consistent, and we're still getting infections. So it's not going to solve the problem. I 100% agree with you, but the states that have mandated annual testing have seen incredible drops in their numbers to the point where they're actually seeing 0 infections every year. Sometimes 1, and they panic because they're not used to that. So I would like to get to a point where if we can cut it in half, wonderful. It would make a huge difference for those producers that are having to get positives when they're exposed versus they'd be able to know sooner, make sure everybody's clean before they're turned out on adjacent lands.
Sure, depending on how much burden that's putting on the total industry. The next question was, how did you circulate the notice of this meeting?
I'll actually follow up with that one. So for the record, Doug Ferris, I wanted to touch back as well. As far as the trick regs, we were actually asked by industry to make changes to the trick regs. So that's what started this. We may not have it fine tuned at this point or where they wanted to be as well. But I mean, we were requested to move forward with this. And one of the requests was mandatory trick testing. So that's part of the reason this isn't just the department's idea. As far as noticing the meeting, we followed all the requirements that we have to by statute under open meeting law. It was posted at the locations that we're required to, as well as we have a contact list of, I believe, email addresses of over 5,000, I believe, that we sent out when we did the survey. We sent it out via those MailChimp, and then we also did this one. This was noticed that way as well.
Well, like I say, I'll repeat that 99% of the people I talked to didn't know about the proposed changes. They had never seen the notice of the meeting. And in the notice of the meeting, you also didn't put in the telephone number. I had to call to find out about that. And I did not get a email. So I just.
How is the email list compiled?
The contact list we have are from producers or involved parties that actually have supplied that with us. So whether you're registering your brand, paying head tax, getting brand inspections, even on to other things as far as licensing for agricultural licensings, we compile it all from that.
Okay, and who makes the final decision on these, and where is that written up on who makes the final decision?
So it'll be through the department, but it's not, I would say it's not I don't know, we follow the practice that we have to in order to change these, and that's why we're having this. So the best scenario is that the final decision is with industry support and the regulatory agencies involvement together. We want to do this with the industry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't communicate correctly. Who will make the decision? Will it be a board vote? Will the state vet make the decision that it goes through, or will the state director or some other person make that decision on if it's goes through?
So this is our third step, I guess. We've proposed the language and we sent it to the Legislative Council Bureau for their approval. We then move on to where we did the small business impact statement and survey, which we've completed that. Then we sent the this workshop, notice that, and then we'll do another workshop, which we know we'll need if not more than this one. And then the final is a hearing where we actually hold another, much like a workshop, but a hearing for a final adoption of the language, and the department holds that. And then that actually goes back to the Legislative Council for final approval.
So I'm sorry, I'm not communicating correctly, but who finally says, yes, we go forward? Is it a voice vote of producers or of the Nevada board, or is it somebody saying, is it one person's decision that says, yes, we go forward with it?
I would say it's a mix of everything. I mean, we want input from everybody, just like we get during this workshop. We'll want that in the next workshop. And then the final determination, though, is by the department, or I guess the final hearing would be held by the Department of Agriculture. And then that moves on to the Legislative Council.
So the Department of Agriculture will vote and on if it goes forward or not. The board.
It's not a board. It's not under the board regulatory.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Dr.
That's all I
Goitia.
have.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Goitia, I see that your hand is raised.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, just real quick, Dr. Mitchell, thank you. I'm going to take a step aside from trick just for a minute. I just want some clarification, 571.040, defining rodeo steers and rodeo cattle. I realize it's under sub E for Mexican cattle, but I'm not sure that's the way it's written there in black and white. Could you please define for me what the difference in rodeo steers and Mexican steers are? We use a lot of native born steers and heifers here in the United States for rodeo events. And I don't think we need to be brucellosis testing, or definitely not tuberculosis testing, our native herds, and worried about the ID requirements being non-compliant with AET as well.
That actually, it was something that we had discussed in the last, since we issued this statement. So we are going to clarify that, because the worry obviously with TB is from the Mexican origin cattle, not the native steers that are born here. So that will be further clarified. Now that is broken up into other language that we had a discussion on before. So I am going to define that with Mexican origin cattle being separate from native born steers.
Okay, and when can we expect to see those changes? If we're having a workshop on changes today, when can we see the changes that you guys have agreed to but didn't include in this?
Planning this week, correct? As fast as we can get it done.
I'll take that. So we're going to take this. I mean, everything we can get here. I know Julie has taken notes on all the comments we're getting, JJ. And so we'll put that together, and as quickly as we can make revisions to it, and then we'll put it out. I know we also had comments from cattlemen's as well. This was the original language that we had drafted, so we had to present it during this meeting. So that's my hopes, is during the next meeting, we can incorporate more of that. We'd like to keep it moving as quick as possible, but depending on how many workshops we end up needing to have, this may get put off and not be able to, may not make the deadline in June before LCB shuts us down and we have to, go into the next session. But we'll try and keep things moving as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you, Administrator. Thank you, Julia.
Okay, so are you ready for me to share my screen again and we can start from the beginning? And okay.
Yes, please.
So I will try to do this just as comments as they come through. If I don't happen to catch it, you're welcome to stop me so that I can get it put back in. But this is also being recorded, so I'll have a chance to go back over the next 24 hours before we get it all put together again. So, all right, Dr. Mitchell, I will let you begin again.
So 571030, the added language approved by the department. Are we just going to wait for comments as we talk through them? Is that what we're doing?
I think that would probably work, but I'm not seeing any hands raised on that topic. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
Again, added language on a test approved by the department for BOVIS.
So that was 571035, number 2. I don't see any hands raised on that one either.
Five 571040 E under 3, cattle originating from Mexico. And again, we will be better defining that so that it's not located under, doesn't involve native steers. And then 1 shall be branded with the letter M on the upper right hip or similar permanent brand as approved by the department.
Tom, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and talk.
Yes, I would like some clarification on keep going there, number 5. Official ID must be listed on the CBI for all Mexican cattle, rodeo cattle of any age. I guess my clarification is, are you specifically talking about Mexican rodeo cattle that's what they do for a living? This does not include, I assume, cattle of Mexican origin that are for feeding purposes or grazing purposes.
Correct. The purpose of this is because the Mexican origin rodeo cattle are a high-risk group. So those are the ones we want to make sure we know who's coming and going. And this would bring us up to the same standards as other states that also require the official ID for Mexican origin cattle participating in events to come into a state to be written on the CBI.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Mitchell, do you want to go ahead and review numbers 3 and 4 as well?
Yep, sorry, I'm making notes so I
No, you're fine.
Under 3, all rodeo steers and or Mexican steers used in a rodeo, roping, exhibition, or similar timed event shall be tested for TB, tuberculosis on an annual basis after entry into the United States. Testing records shall be in possession of any owner, manager, agent, or representative in possession of rodeo cattle at all times. Testing records shall include an official ID number, all official ID numbers which coincide with the rodeo and or Mexican cattle in possession. And number 4 would be official Mexico ID ear tags must be retained after entry into the United States. We hit upon 5. So I'll go to 6. Only steers and spayed heifers may be imported into Nevada. And then 7, Mexican origin cattle must not be co-pastured with any other livestock. $571,065, striking out the language that pertain to North American elk or domesticated cervidae. If anybody has any questions on that, that just brings the regulation up to the standard regulation that's in place now. 571,080, dogs and cats changing 3 months to 12 weeks. $571,095 for transportation of livestock, allowing the department or allowing the language or as directed by the department to adjust that 30-day CBI limit based on disease states and or to allow for potential of a 6-month horse passport in the future.
And on these, Dr. Mitchell, since we've already read through all of these, if you want to just do 571.095, if anybody has comments, questions, or would like edits to that, we can just, that'll save everybody a little bit of time. Thank you.
And then also, I'll keep moving to 571.105. Quarantine if there's no permit issued. 571.130 related to the emergency import of livestock. 571.300, adding veterinary biologic to better define. 571.310, adding language that could present a hazard to animals or livestock or to the livestock industry of the state as determined by the department. 571.355, regarding OCV language. $571.390, adding test options for EIA testing. Under trichomoniasis, I'll skip to 571.608 where we added to be free from infection to better define what a positive bull means. Again, 571.612, just updating language to reflect PCR testing and infection of disease states. Again, 571.620, just defining language for what infection means. $571.634, changing active to intact. It's actually intact cattle. $571.640, again, updating language for trichomoniasis.
Bruce Bratling, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and talk.
Dr. Mitchell, I know it's going through the definitions here. I don't see a definition for a test eligible bull.
I think we didn't change the definition, so it's not in here, and I can find the 571 that pertains to, but it is in the original 571.
Okay. And do you recall if that's at 18 months or 12 months?
12 months.
Okay.
Dr. Spratling, is that something you'd like to see changed, or you just wanted to make sure that we weren't changing that?
I just wanted to make sure that it was in the NAC.
Okay, yeah. This only incorporated here are the sections that have changes. So if we didn't make changes, we didn't put it into this document. Thank you.
It's 571633 in case you want to look at it. Five 7164641 annual trichomoniasis testing requirement.
John, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and talk.
Thank you. Dr. Mitchell, we feel like that having dates on when the test has to happen is going to be pretty cumbersome for us. As mentioned was before getting a vet in the spring of the year can be pretty problematic. We'd prefer to see that not as dates, but as prior to turnout. Gives producers plenty of time to get it done.
And I will just comment on that because I know that has come up a couple times before. For us, we need a stopping point so we know who's past and who's current. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's when you're trying to figure out who is tested and who hasn't, if it's on a constant rolling day to day, it's going to be more difficult to regulate. So that's why a lot of states have that April 15 requirement. So we know who has it and who hasn't done it. I do understand prior to turnout because that is the other side of the coin is I want to make sure that we're getting everyone before they turn out and not calling them afterward and, oh, I already turned my bulls out and I'll do it when they come back in, because that may be what we end up with. So I totally understand that. We'll take that into consideration, but that's why we had to pick a date. That's what other states have done because it makes the regulation easier and it gives producers kind of a goal point and veterinarians so that they can plan their schedules as well. So.
I appreciate that, but it's going to be really difficult, and if it's going to be a requirement every year, it'll be an every year requirement, and if there's a problem, it'll be known that the infected herd wasn't tested. So seems like that we have a calendar year. Seems like excuse me, that we have a trick testing year. Could be enough in light of difficulties in getting a vet spring of the year, weather included. Thanks.
Can I ask John too, if we left a date but pushed it out farther, would that help, or is it still not?
Well, that would certainly help. But any way we could not have a date, I think is our preferred solution.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute and speak.
Yes, mandatory yearly trick testing is going to be an unnecessary, excessive government intrusion, especially when ranchers are already stressed both economically and physically by low prices and drought. It would be costly and burdensome for producers to comply with and for the state to enforce. I notice you keep saying, well, the neighboring states, I don't know why that would even come into play. The neighboring states have nothing to do with the producers here in Nevada and the burden that it will cause all of them. And once again, I worry that there's a lot of producers out there that don't know about this and haven't raised their voice in opposition to it because they don't even know about it. Thank you.
So I can speak to that a little bit as far as the adjacent states. The reason I bring that up is because we do have quite a few commuter herds in the state. And we have specific agreements with other states for those herds to move back and forth. And so that creates an issue when we have more lax regulations than the other states do, and they're concerned about affecting their state. Or same thing, we might have a commuter herd that leaves the state, goes out of state, comes back. And if they're not testing routinely, it would be very easy to miss a positive. And so that's why we bring that up. And as well as for interstate commerce, when other states know that you have a lot of trick, it makes it more difficult to abide by both sets of regulations. There are some states that don't accept culture. It narrows the field down for producers to be able to transport to those states. So we're trying to somewhat come up on an even keel with those states.
Do you know how much trick is in Nevada? I put in a FOIA request and I haven't received it back. They said it'd take 2 or 3 weeks. So do you know the numbers?
I don't know the stats for 2021. I had them previous. I can get those to you when we have those available. We're still compiling a lot of data as well. I will say we've had some of our biggest positive herds this last spring. So it's one thing to look at percentages of tests, but when you have one big herd that's got several bulls and they're sharing a grazing allotment that affects 5 or 7 different other producers, that's where it becomes a problem.
Correct, and that's why you have the good regulations currently, and if you strengthen them up, then that can clean up that problem. Thank you.
Aaron, I see that your hand is raised. Aaron Kessler, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. I mean, I agree a lot with Jennifer, and I don't need to echo what she said. But a question on those dates. I mean, I currently trick test my bulls in the fall. And I'm against mandatory trick testing, but I do trick test. But one question is, if there is positive bull, my first question is, do you guys enforce? If I'm correct, I think there's a rule that all your neighbors have to trick test. And my first question is, do you guys enforce that? And my second question is, on these dates of having to test by April 15th, what are you guys going to do with those guys that run outside year round on permits and they're lucky to get their cattle gathered once a year in the fall to wean calves, and they never regather, you know, those operations that run bulls year round? That's going to almost be impossible for those guys to regather in the spring and trick test bulls.
So for the first part of the question, current regulations do require that any neighboring herd, there's actually a definition of exposed herd, that any exposed herd does have to test within 8 months. We don't specifically have a regulation that requires the producer to inform their neighbors. I will say, luckily, we have had several that are very open about that, but we have quite a few that don't. And so again, the annual testing would make an easier diagnosis for those that don't share that information or choose not to. So we'd have that notification to,
So it's actually up to the producer to notify their neighbor that they're required to test, not the state vet. Is that correct?
No, not in our regulations. Our regulations require that the department does an epidemiologic investigation to identify exposed herds, and the exposed definition is there. So that is in the requirement that yes, the department can require testing from any exposed herd. We don't have a specific law. I know some other states do that require the producer to notify adjacent herds. In many cases, like I said, they go ahead and do that. We've been fortunate in that respect, but there are quite a few that have chosen not to. And so if we don't have proof that they're exposed, or for some of the herds that travel throughout the state quite a bit, and we don't know where they've been, if they were at least tested once a year, we'd at least know that that herd was clean, at least at that time.
Okay. So on these dates that I mean, it's saying, or by April 15th. I mean, if a guy tests in the fall at preg checking time, is that sufficient? Or are you gonna make us retest before we turn out on summer range again?
Well, the goal is to get tested after they've been exposed, when they've not been exposed to females, then put out on land. So that's where the springtime testing comes into play. Because do you test in the fall and then put them back? You don't put them back on to try to breed them, correct?
No, currently I test everything in the fall and then no, I don't put them back on the cow herd, but I'm just saying there have been situations. I've had other ranches where I've ran bulls year round. I currently don't, but I'm just concerned for those guys, those more desert outfits that just run bulls year round, and they're lucky to get their cow herd gathered once a year, you know? So
Yeah.
I just wondering how that's going to affect them, you know?
Dr. Spratling, I see that your hand is up as well. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can talk.
I have a feeling about I think in other NRS regarding disease animals and functions and responsibilities of the state veterinarian, I think it's the departments. If you have a test chart in your possession that says there's a positive bull out there, I think that's a regulatory function to notify the neighboring herds. I don't think that function should be put on the producer himself if he does come up positive. I think you can go through several portions of the statute, and which talks about the functions of the state veterinarian and the director in the Department of Agriculture, and the responsibilities of that regulation of a disease. I think would cover the requirement for the state veterinarian to do the notification of an exposed herd. So I don't think we need to have necessarily a specific change in regulation here that talks about that it becomes your responsibility. I think it's already inherent. Secondly, is as far as turnout times, I have to agree with Aaron that I would say the majority of the bulls that I test in the fall is in the fall when people are separating, they're coming home off the range, weaning their calves, testing their cows, and then they go ahead and run the bulls through and test them, and they stay separated, basically stay separated in the cow herd until the next spring. So I think even behaviorally, it's important to do it in the fall. The bulls have been with the cows, are a little thinner, they come off the range. In the spring, if they've been on, start getting a little bit of green grass or a little better feed, it becomes an issue to start putting bulls back through the chute in the spring. So I think the fall is probably the prime time to be testing bulls on spring calving cows. And so I don't think that we should be thinking about pushing people to testing closer into the spring, into turnout again. Thank you.
And just to your first point, I didn't include language for the producer to tell neighbors. I would hope that they were good neighbors and would tell their neighbors, but that language wasn't put in ours. And I agree, it is already written that we can establish who's exposed and notify those ranches to test.
I see Davey has his hand up, Julie.
Yes. Dave, if you'd like to go ahead and speak, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Amy and Doug, I'm with John on these date specifics, but Amy, can you explain the April 15th, and would that date suffice as to be the only mention of a date in that specific part of the code?
I mean, as opposed to the commuter language, or just for the annual testing for Nevada cattle only?
That's correct.
Okay. The April 15th, yes, was, I'm not set in stone, but that is what's been used, just because the goal is to get those cattle tested before they're turned out for summer grazing. So if that is a big hurdle, I don't mind listening to other recommendations. I'm just trying to think in my head how we would regulate that if we did Like if we went to I hate the word annual because then you have to define annual, right? So is it calendar year? Is it a trick year? We may be able to define it differently so that if someone's testing every year and they're testing on rested bulls, we could still incorporate that into the language.
I appreciate that. And maybe Dr. Amy and Doug, maybe we'll highlight this one for our in-person hearings that we're going to have in the future. As a cattleman standpoint, it looks like this one's one that we could hash out. I don't want to drag it out today. Thank you very much.
Jacob Carter, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that, so I've been testing every fall, 45 days to 60 days after I pull my bulls off the herd every fall. And so just to clarify, does that mean if we did test, then we'd have to test again April 15th? That I didn't see the clarification in that.
You test when in the fall?
I test my bulls in the fall because anything that comes up then I want them gone. I don't want them around my ranch. So I test in the fall every fall. And
after September 1st?
Yes. Yes. So I test after September 1st. And what my next thing is going to be a concern because I also combine doing my trick testing along with brucellosis vaccination. And so trying to combine all those things, because in the state, it's hard enough trying to get a vet to come out once, let alone come out twice. And if you've got everybody testing in April, when you're trying to do all your spring work, calving, whatever, that is going to be extremely difficult. So I'm just trying to understand for clarification here. If I test after September 1st, does that mean I do have to test again 45 days before I turn out?
So that's why I'm asking, because if we're saying the testing season starts September 1 and goes to the following spring, and you've tested negative and those bulls haven't been back on females, then that would, to me, that would fulfill your yearly testing requirement for the trick season.
That's what I was just trying to clarify. But so technically I would be good unless I decide to every once in a while I'll run a fall herd in the wintertime, depending on the situation, depending on cattle prices, whatever. So I'd have to test again April 15th. Is that correct?
If you tested earlier than September 1.
So I tested after September 1st, and I was clean, let's say, but then I went on and I put some of those bulls on a fall herd. And so I'm running through the winter time. Does that mean I need to test those specific bulls that went on the herd, that fall herd, by April 15th?
I would say no, because your test after September would qualify for that trick season's test.
Okay, but you mentioned if those bulls did not go on cows, open cows, then it wouldn't matter. But you made that mention that if they go on open cows, then we have a problem. So I was just trying to clarify that. So as long as I'm doing it once a year at that time, then I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The other concern is that April 15th mark of trying to schedule a vet. I mean, that, because a lot of guys are going to be doing it during that time, and that's going to be a really difficult thing for the vets to schedule. That's all they're going to be doing. I mean, it's going to be pretty busy time, but that's my comments. That's a concern that I have there.
Okay.
And this is Doug Ferris again. I just want to say, I actually read it the same way as Jacob does, what he's saying, that if he puts them back on open cows, then the way this is written, you would have to test again. So I think that's something that we need to take into consideration that isn't feasible.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. That's how I read it. Thanks.
I don't see any more hands raised at this point.
Okay, we can go ahead and jump down to the next one then, please.
Next part of the Language is just clarifying the language for CVI versus health certificate. And making sure within 60 days prior to entry, they have not had contact with female cattle from the time of import. Again, just language updating PCR and trichomoniasis as a disease state. And reducing the number of tests required to 2 because it's PCR, not culture. Again, going on, just language changes for trichomoniasis and PCR allowance.
We've
We
got a
actually
couple of
have-
hands
we have-
raised.
We have 2 hands.
Yeah. Let's see. Madison, I see that yours probably went up first. Can I get you to go ahead and unmute yourself, and you're welcome to speak.
Yeah, I just have one question. It seems like there's not enough current employees at the state. There's also not enough brand inspectors. So who is going to be out here enforcing this?
Well, to be honest, we're spending more time right now chasing things down. So if we did have annual testing and we knew a start time and an end time, it would make things easy on our end. Again, getting rid of culture would also make things easy on our end. So we would be able to be more efficient from that respect. And as far as the brand inspectors, they're going to have the same amount of, I want to say workload, but right now we're hoping that if we do get the diseases under control, we would have less problems having to regulate that from a brand inspector standpoint.
So who in the beginning, who are you planning on regulating this? Enforcing this?
It's the same staff that we have previously. Currently, we're just strengthening the regulations to hopefully decrease the amount of trick in the long run, and then also make the process on our end a little bit more efficient.
John, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to go ahead and unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. Dr. Mitchell, where it says where you have changed in the regs about a requirement for 2 negative PCR tests, can one of those be a pool test?
So that was another issue that did come up because the 2 tests were actually one of the parts that industry asked for with regard to PCR. And that may be language where we need to update as well before the next iteration, but 2 pooled tests or a pooled in an individual, yes, that would be wonderful over a culture. And so again, if we get rid of culture, that'll solve quite a few of the problems as well, but I would not have a problem having one of those tests be pooled.
So do I understand you correctly? We can look forward to language saying or striking the individual requirement.
We could. So that was also brought up before. So, and I can go over data a million times, but 2 pooled would be better than 1 almost anything because that sample is your best key. So if you're testing twice, you're more likely to pick up that real result than just relying on 1 test. So I would be happy with that.
Okay, thank you.
And Tom Talbot, I see that you have your hand raised, so you're welcome to go ahead and.
Okay, thank you. So I would just like some clarification. Are you eliminating the culture as a means of the trichomoniasis test and going strictly to PCR, or is the PCR only being used in the case of having found a positive culture?
So the goal is to remove culture altogether because it creates more issues with having to retest and issues with lab certifications. So the PCR being such a better, more improved test, even a pooled test is such a more improved test. That's our goal, is to go towards PCR testing and eliminate culture.
Okay. And Dr. Spratling, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would like to comment just a little bit about pooled. I think Dr. Mitchell and I have had discussions already about pooled testing as opposed to individual. The only, my personal feeling is the only place that an individual test might be required is after you've found that a herd is positive. That very next test, an individual test would realistically to me would have some merit in having an individual test for that situation. I think pool testing, there could be some data points that could be argued back and forth, but our goal here is to increase testing and reduce trick. I'm pretty sure we all would agree on that. But the big difference in pool testing, you reduce that cost significantly to the rancher, and that at that point, it is actually is cheaper than when we were doing a lot of cultures. And I just feel that it's an important tool to not have a bias against that tool. I think it really is a key to helping get more people that can afford without having a big financial drain on the ranch to have pool testing be a significant portion of the attack here.
No, and I agree with that, and I understand, and that's why we pushed hard to get pooled testing out as soon as we could, because I wanted that cost savings, and I wanted people to be encouraged to have an easier, more accessible test cost-wise. And we have seen quite a few benefits from that, and I'm not opposed to that at all. My only concern is, like you said, there are cases for individual PCR. And I have seen labs that will run a pooled test, and on a pooled sample, it's a negative. But when they break those tests out individually, because they did have a positive in another pool, they had two positives in a set of 5 pooled tests that came back negative. So it's not common, but you are diluting that sample a little bit. But I think changing the language to eliminate the individual and giving us, I think we discussed that before about discretion if we need it, that would be definitely a consideration. So.
No, I just feel that when we start looking at problems in the testing process, that by far the having any kind of bias against pool testing is insignificant compared to the things that we run into when we're testing those bulls. You set a date, it's below 0 that morning. Handling those samples or on a hot afternoon, not keeping them cool enough. The actual handling of the samples and the testing process itself has a much greater chance of missing a positive bull than a pool test will. So I think if we're going to be realistic, let's stick with the things that do the most good for us for the money.
And 571648, we move on. Regarding the untested bull, subject to quarantine order. And then, sorry, Joy, I didn't see the 571 on that one. 571654, just adding their designee in addition to the administrator for epidemiological investigations. 571656. Again, we will address the individual PCR. And then infected herd getting 2 official PCRs for trick within 8 months. Give a hand.
John, I see that your hand is raised. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Is a VS 127 form, is that the normal health certificate?
It's not. So that was what other states were using, and we've already gotten feedback and had discussions on that too, and we're taking out the VS 127. So the purpose of the language, just so you know, it wasn't to require it. It was to allow that as a substitution. If those bulls came from Utah and that's what they have, I'll take it. If I can arrange it, no problem. I'm not going to require them for a different form. So we will amend that to just basically say a form approved by the departments, that if we want to do our own forms, if we want to go back to the branding, we can do that. So that will be adjusted in that VS 120. You can just consider that not there for the rest of the document.
Thank you very much.
And then let's see, where is it? Clarification, the language to make sure that the bull enters slaughter channel within 30 days of a positive test. Again, we'll address the PCR going forward as well. Changing cow or heifer to 12 months instead of 20 months. Changing the language from release to consign. And then language to include that all cattle from an infected herd and entering a slaughter channel shall remain under quarantine until moved to slaughter.
I do know also, Dr. Mitchell, going back to the 20 to 12, I believe we've received the comment requesting 18 on that.
Okay. And that, yeah, that was originally only changed to 20 because we also received a recommendation from industry that they wanted 20. So I'm fine with going to 18. Again, 571660, remove the VS 127 form. Let's see.
Dr. Spratling, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak.
I hate to speak too many times, but I'm old enough that I use that V brand on the tailhead a lot since 1975. And I think it's very valuable in the fact that when that bull like that is in the slaughter channel and goes through a sale yard, everybody knows exactly what that bull is when it comes through the sale ring. So I think there are some advantages to that. And I don't think we never had anything issued by the state, the actual iron itself, just 2 bars. I mean, just using a bar twice in a V pattern is all it takes. It's not a difficult brand to put on. And I hope it's not just, I hope you don't take it out of the regulations, because there is some value to it.
No, and I totally agree with that. And I would rather, in a perfect world, I would love to have the brand. I know Utah, I think, is reinstituting their brand as well. We just haven't used it in so long. I don't want to create language that eliminates all other possibilities, but the language that we introduced does include including but not limited to a special brand. So we can revisit that 110%. So I purposely wrote that way so that we could revisit that once resources and supplies would allow, and we would be able to start that kind of program. So that is a possibility.
Can I ask you a question, Dr. Spratling?
Most certainly.
All right. Since you said you used that before, I just want to pick your brain then. Is that, so were you doing it as a vet, or was it the producers that were applying those back when they were utilizing them, or?
There was a little bit of both back then. It was a little more Wild West back then, I have to admit. But I applied a lot of them, and when we were doing just a voluntary test, and it was a culture, I would call and they would get those bulls in, and when they'd send them to town, they would have that V up on their tailhead. So there was a little bit of both going on.
Okay, thank you.
A 571662, additional testing after a bull receives a positive test. I see a hand.
I see that you've raised your hand. You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak. Jennifer?
Sorry, I'm not too computer literate, and I'm sorry I'm taking up so much of your time. I apologize for that. But Doug, you mentioned that it was industry generated. Do you define industry as the associations of agricultural associations, or just private people? How do you define industry when you use it in that term?
I would say, I think we received input from both, from private individuals as well as associations.
All right. Thank you. Like I say, sorry, I'll try to quit asking.
No worries. That's why we're here. This is what we want to get through. So I appreciate the questions.
Five seven one six four four regarding the time frame allowed to submit samples for an official test. 571666 regarding official laboratory inspections to be biennial. And then 571667 regarding diseased animals, limitations of transport and transfer of ownership. Got a hand.
Dr. Spratling, you're welcome to go ahead and unmute yourself and speak.
I need to wait till 667 is what I was actually getting in line for.
You're welcome to have at it. She's ready for you to go ahead and have your questions or comments.
Okay, I think the wording that's involved in this in 667 is really problematic, because if you read it to the letter of the law, you would be unable, once you're put on the hold order, you would be unable to even get a brand inspection for the bull that's positive. I think we need to work, the original intent on compliance, enforcing the compliance, was that if someone is put on hold order and over a period of time does not show any reason or any indication that they want to comply, then these sorts of things would be put into effect. And the way it's written right now, there's no qualifier there, just for the breeding animals, or, is it exclude the feeder cattle and calves and steers and feeder heifers under a certain age? So those are I think we need to get the shall, and that is what really bothers me in both in number 1 and number 2.
Did we, it looks like some of it was erased, yes?
Yeah, it's my computer.
Okay. I've got good old trusty paper, so hold on.
Try and get it back up here for you. Hang on.
I think my point is for the department to deny brand inspections or other services as directed by the administrator or state quarantine officer. That's kind of an out right there. But when it says they shall not get brand inspections, it would tell me that, okay, I've got a positive bull, I've been put on hold order, and I can't get a brand inspection to even get rid of the positive bull, the way it's written currently.
Gotcha. And I will say that again, goes back to the branding and the official forms. Ideally would help solve that. But when I issue those hold orders, I do go into detail about what can and can't move. And if they are sending it to slaughter, that we need to be notified. So I can update that language.
We can update that, Dr. Spratling. Yeah. I agree with you. In reading that, it's too definitive. So I agree with you.
Thank you very much.
Aaron Kessler, I see that you have your hand raised. You're welcome to go ahead and unmute and speak.
Yeah, when I originally raised my hand, I had the same concern that Dr. Spratling did. because I know I've been in a situation before where I've had, you know, thousands of calves contracted to ship and then get nervous that they're going to be denied shipping because of a quarantine order. So yes, that definitely needs to be clarified. And then just another question on, so I know this meeting is for input, but this mandatory trick testing, I mean, what's the chances of you guys changing your mind on that? I mean, I know there's been petitions sent into you. There's been some opposition from producers right now on mandatory trick. I mean, how much effect do we really have on swaying you guys, I guess, is my other question.
So I think with what, I'll try and hit on that, I think. As far as the email address that Julia listed earlier and stuff, if people want to send us written comments after this, we're good with that. We want more input. I don't know. I know I guess we're pulled different directions as well. You know, some people don't want it at all. Some want changes somewhere in there. I think we have to try and make a happy medium that works for, you know, the regulatory agency as well as the producers without, you know, going too far one way or the other. So that would be our goal, but we're open to, you know, any further comments that people want to submit. Absolutely.
So right now, do you have more people want mandatory trick, or do you have more opposition towards mandatory trick?
I don't think we don't really have statistics on that at this time, I wouldn't say. I know we've got some groups that have requested it, and we have individuals that haven't. And you know, the list of signatures that we got, I just looked at that this morning. So I don't know where it is as far as all one way or the other, but that's what we hope to work through in doing this workshop process and the regulatory process.
Okay, thank you.
David Stick, you can go ahead and unmute and feel free to speak.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to take a quick moment for some historical context. I think it's really important that everybody here know. And first of all, Department of Ag, thank you very much. I know this is a requirement that you have to do, but you've done a good job explaining everybody's questions. But I don't think you should be completely thrown under the bus. I think the Nevada Cattlemen's Association supports this. I'm a member, I'm on the board of directors, and I was there when they voted overwhelmingly to support mandatory trick program. And I think people should know that. And I think all of our folks out there that are raising cattle, we brought together some good people. We brought together veterinarians, state veterinarians from Department of Agriculture that surround us, and we brought them into public forum to discuss why it is so important to get trick under control. And I think it's a very obtuse way of looking at things in our industry that we think that we can completely operate within our boundaries of the state of Nevada. And that is so wrong. There's a big fear. If anybody knows that ships their cattle out of state, steers, heifers, cows, bulls, you have to obtain a health certificate. And I mean, it's real. And our state has to export cattle to survive. And I just wanted to put that out there. That's one of the main reasons that we wanted to see this happening. Many of us, including our family, are doing this every year because we do travel out of state. Every year we're doing this. We have to. So it's important for everybody to realize that to export our cattle out of state, we want to be clean, and we don't want those states around us to ever come up and say, hey, Nevada, we don't want your cattle anymore. So I will close with that. Thank you very much.
Jacob Carter, you're welcome to unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, just to share a thought. I don't know if I'm exactly ready for mandatory either. I do it every year. I support getting trick tested every year, anybody and everybody. The problem is as I think somebody else mentioned it earlier, that a lot of times the way to make money on your operation, especially in the times we're in right now, is to lower costs, not increase costs. And they got to be in the right spot. And now, don't get me wrong, I know what damage trick can do. It damaged my herd about 12 years ago, and we got aggressive on it. We cleaned it up. We got it out. But when it comes mandatory, using those words and that on an industry that's already struggling, trying to individual operation, I shouldn't say industry, individual operations in our state, and the demands on that, it's just difficult for me. And so just to voice my opinion on that, I don't know if I support mandatory, but I definitely support strong, encouraging rules and regulations to get trick tested for everybody to do that. So thanks. I just wanted to add that comment.
Aaron Kessler, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute and speak.
Thank you. So just one other question, and I know it was addressed in nobody made a comment on it earlier, but it was just saying that no adult vaccinated cattle can be brought in the state or something along those lines. And I know Nevada currently does not do adult vac, but is that something you guys have considered, or, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know if that's where we discussed that or in another meeting, but just a question I had,
And I can clarify that too, with regard to the brucellosis vaccine. That was put in there specifically because we didn't have anything that said we couldn't do it, because we've had veterinarians call and ask how to give an adult vaccine. Well, we don't allow that. We haven't. And so that was clarifying language that was added. I do understand, because I did have some conversations with a couple of producers that were concerned if we did have an outbreak again. And so that language also can be amended just to clarify. I guess I would say leave the door open that we could potentially accept it in the future. I know for the most part, the industry that I've had conversations with doesn't want to change the brucellosis regulations. I know other states are changing theirs. However, we can leave that door open a little bit so that if I would never cut it off. If we had an outbreak and had to use the vaccine, obviously that's what we would do. But we can amend that language to make that more clear for sure.
Okay, more clear that possibly, you're saying more clear that possibly in the future we could do adult vaccination. Is that
correct? So, or just allow
for
it. I'm not trying to push the brucellosis issue. I know there's a lot of sides, everybody on either side of that one, but if there was an outbreak, or if in the future we did want to accept adult vaccinates, I would, again, I hate to be limiting, because I don't want to have to go through this process again in a couple of years, because we could have made a change now that would allow for that. Because there are current studies being done, hopefully more in the future. So we could amend that language to something to the effect of, unless authorized by the department, something to the effect of we would possibly allow that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to go ahead and unmute and speak.
Thank you. As we proceed here and look at the whole trichomoniasis program, the way it sits today, I can think back to before we had the program that we've got today. I can look at today's program. I can look at the proposals that are out on the table. And there is one thing that I'd like to suggest. The simpler that you can make the program, the better chance you have for implementation and enforcement. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. If Dr. Spratling owns a bull and I own a bull, he tests his bull, I test my bull, we're both good. That's pretty simple.
I think we lost you, Sam. I don't know if you were still talking.
You didn't lose me. That was the end of my comment.
Oh, okay. All right.
Trying to keep it simple, Doug.
All right. I appreciate that. I just didn't want us to miss anything. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
We have a WL Wolf showing with hands raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Lily Wolf. I had for Dr. Mitchell or maybe Mr. Ferris. I just was wondering, okay, basically with this current regulation, Dr. Mitchell, you had mentioned that, well, you were hoping that the neighbors would, if I tested my bulls and I came up with a positive, that the way I took what you said is that I would go to my neighbor and say, hey, I had a hot bull, so just so you guys know. But could you explain this current regulation? And then as far as the way the testing results work, because if I test my bulls, I thought that that was submitted to the state automatically so that you guys are aware of, where there are trichomoniasis bulls. And I thought that this regulation then carried it forward so that you guys would go to the people that were infected and then go around to the neighboring herds. So I guess, could you guys, either one of you, explain that, the way the regulation currently is?
I can go into detail on that. So we don't have a requirement for a producer to tell their neighbor. I brought that up. That was one of the questions that came up, and there are states that do require that. We don't currently require that. I do like when they do that because it makes our jobs easier, because now when I'm calling adjacent herds, they already know what to expect. They've already lined up the vet to test their bulls, or they already have their test available to me. So that's not in this regulation. What's in our current regulations is that once a positive is resulted out, or a suspect, the veterinarian actually has 48 hours to notify NDA. So that's part of their accreditation requirement through the USDA, is that they notify us of any reportable disease. In the state of Nevada, trich is a reportable disease. The labs, so our lab will notify me. I will always have our lab supervisor will always let me know if we have a positive, but other states don't always do that. And so that's a little bit one difficulty, although it's reportable in Nevada, so they should. So that is already in place. And then two, once that positive is resulted out and that vet notifies NDA, we start our investigation. And then I do notify every adjacent ranch, or if there's a common grazing allotment, I notify all of those ranch owners also. Anyone that we have reason to believe was exposed, we do notify them regardless. It's just nice when a neighbor, and I think for those that do share common grazing allotments, it's nice to know that your neighbor's at least saying, hey, I got one, you might want to test yours or make sure yours are negative. That's, to me, would be common courtesy, but it doesn't always happen. But yes, in the current regulation, that is our job. My job as a state vet is to do an epidemiological investigation and identify all those herds that were exposed or are adjacent herds to notify them.
And so you say, though, that there are some states that would require it. So they have language. I mean, if you made this 571 language stronger, that you could say, okay, test results that come into me, I have the right to notify the neighboring herds, and they have to be required to test.
There are states that require the positive owner to notify neighboring herds.
Okay, so we could have language like that instead of going to just mandatory trich across the entire state.
We could, but I don't see how we would have I don't see how it would accomplish the goal like mandatory testing would. And I say that because most owners don't want to notify their neighbors. And sometimes we have difficulty getting the information from the positive rancher initially. So the comparison of those two modalities for controlling trich, annual testing is just it's a much more effective tool than relying on a producer to do that work.
But why does it have to be the producer? Why can't it be written that it's you, the state vet, that does it? Because I mean, if people are testing, why can't it be that my test results have to be given to the Department of Agriculture. And then the Department of Agriculture has to say, okay, Lily, you have a positive bull, therefore, who are your neighbors? I will notify the neighbors.
That is the way it works right now. That is the way the regulations are written, and that's the way that we proceed right now.
And
why aren't you successful with that then? Why do you feel you're not successful with that?
Did you want to comment, Doug? Or you want me to go for that one?
I can try to follow up a little bit. So since I've been here, that's the way it's been written. But the issue we have there is, for one, we don't always get reported when somebody's positive, like Dr. Mitchell talked about. But then the other issue that we run into is, if we do get notified that, say your neighbor had a positive bull, we do our best to try and figure out who the neighboring herds are. Sometimes the person that's positive is not free in giving out that information. They won't even share who they neighbor with. And then we have many incidents where we'll contact the neighboring herd and say, we know you neighbor them, or you ran in common last summer. And they say, no, we didn't. And at that point, it's the end of our investigation, because we can't go any farther.
You mentioned also commuter herds, and I guess define your commuter herds. And the way I interpret it is, it seems like that's where maybe some of the cause of these issues are.
So commuter herds are the herds that go state to state for summer grazing. So we have agreements with adjacent states that there are ranchers that take their breeding herd out of state for usually the summer and come back. Then that's where both states having good regulations plays a part, because those states could at any time say, we're not going to participate with Nevada because you guys have dirty bulls and we don't want to risk it. So that's always a concern. But when those herds are moving, they do have to have trick tests before they travel, before that commuter herd season starts. The ones that are applying for the permits aren't the problem. It's the ones that are going in and out of states without those permits that also aren't trick testing that we've had more of a problem with. So again, if we had annual testing, at least I would find out that that herd went to another state ahead of time, because their trick test is done. And that's the biggest worry, versus after they've already entered that state illegally. And now we're trying to figure out which bulls moved, which cows moved, and we're now in a multi-state investigation, because now it involves more than just Nevada. So that's what the commuter herds are. They are supposed to have their trick tests done before they, for that commuter season starts, before they go to the other state.
But I think in 2018, when this was brought up with, at the Cattlemen's Convention, actually, and I think they were kind of giving the example that you're talking about, and then come to find out, I believe that the bull that they thought was a Nevada bull, it was actually an Idaho bull. And so which requires mandatory trick testing, correct? So, I mean, to me, it seems like you're still having the issue on both sides.
Well, I do know of, and I don't know if that was the case, but I do know of 1 year that Idaho had one positive, and it was a Nevada bull. And so I'm not sure if that, because I get told that all the time. So, but no, yes, Idaho does have much stricter regulations, and their numbers they rarely have a positive. I'll put it that way. So when our bulls end up in a state like that rarely has a positive, maybe one positive every 3 years, they get very mad. And so the goal is, yes, to control those commuter herds also, but they're going to be less likely to travel. And if we have mandatory testing, if you're testing anyway for the state, you can arrange that time so it also qualifies for your commuter herd. And now we have compliance on both ends, with commuter herd and with the trick regulations. So that would solve two problems.
I guess back to where you say, well, some states have the regulation that you guys can enforce this when there's a positive in a herd, and if I had a positive bull, then you would go to my neighboring herds. I guess what I don't understand is I always felt this regulation, that's how this worked. And you're saying that it doesn't work that way. So how are other states, I'm not sure what state you're talking about that has that kind of a regulation. I guess if you could tell me what that is, A, and then B, why couldn't we make language that was like that state's regulation so that we could have it that way?
Where the producer has to tell their neighbors.
You're right. Yes, because from what my understanding in the history of this regulation, that was the thought that, I mean, you keep saying, well, I as a neighbor need to tell my neighbor, but there again, I think the thought here was that the Department of Agriculture would say, listen, Lily, you have a positive bull. Now we're going to notify your neighbors. So you guys would notify the neighbors.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing now. In regulation, that's what it allows us to do now, but it's not sufficient to control the trick problem. So that's why we're looking at mandatory testing. And if we were to add language to require a producer, it's not going to change that in the long run. It's for us to do that investigation is obviously more weighty than the producer just going to neighbors, but relying on that producer that's already not telling us possibly the full story to then tell the full story to their neighbors, we're not going to make much headway. So that's why we're going to the annual testing, because that will make the biggest difference as far as getting everybody to comply and know who's positive before we have large outbreaks or before those herds go out to another state.
Okay, well, thank you.
Aaron Kessler, I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute and speak.
Thank you. Just one question. Do you know how many producers are testing right now in the state? Do you guys track that at all?
Testing yearly or just testing at this time?
No, just testing annually. I mean, how many people are currently testing annually? Do you know?
I don't know. And I don't think that's hard to tell because sometimes those tests go out of state and then come back our direction. So,
oh, okay. So you're not necessarily keeping track then right now then?
no, other than the quarantines, we're able to keep track to some extent because a lot of people say they test annually. And then when we ask for the data, I don't always get the data. But I know there are some users that have tested annually that have come up positive on or either exposed or positive on quarantines. But as an overall number of who's testing annually, I don't believe we have that data.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly look into that. We at least have data on, and if we can run it by name, we might be able to get that information.
Davy Sticks, you're welcome to unmute and speak.
Okay, 2 quick points. Dr. Amy and Doug, sovereign nations, enforceability is going to be so important. I don't want to leave out our producers that are surrounded or neighbor an Indian reservation. That is going to be really important. And how you handle that, boy, God be with you. And the other point too, Doug, if I could help you with Lily, there's 2 parts to this. We're forgetting a second major part of this. Not only is it the mandatory testing of bulls, but it's also there's a mechanism in place to make sure that if you don't take care of this, something's going to happen. And that is you're not going to get a brand inspection. And I think that's important to go back to explain to Lily that in the past you could just leave and not do a thing. You didn't have to clean up your herd because your next available opportunity was when you went to slaughter, and that took care of it. So this is a way to get it taken care of. But there's 2 parts to this, and that's the most important. And that's you don't get a brand inspection until you clean it up. I just wanted to add that, Doug. Sorry.
Thank you, Dave.
Lily, you're welcome to unmute and go ahead and speak.
Okay, I guess that's the thing currently when you say the brand inspection. So with the current regulation, I can still get a brand inspection?
That is correct, yes.
Well, what if you change the language so that you couldn't get a brand inspection? So then people that I guess you're talking about that have a hold order against them.
We could, but then that's only going to apply to somebody that's been identified as having trick positive. Anybody that if we haven't been notified, we'll have no control over that then, and we can't have any oversight.
Okay, how come the regulation can't be that you have to be notified if I have a trick positive? If I send my, if I send my tests out of state and I know that I have a trick positive bull, how come you can't make the regulation that says I have to let you know?
It is currently, but that doesn't mean everybody does it. That's why we're going down this path, because people don't comply.
Okay, and then across the state, where are the problem? I mean, is this a statewide problem, or do you have it to find out where the problems are?
I think there's areas that are more hotspots, but it's across the state.
You think it's across the state, but as far as, I mean, you know that you have hot spots then for sure, and then you don't know if it's statewide.
No, I believe it is statewide. There are some areas that are, seem to be more prone, or that we get more reports out of, but otherwise it is a statewide issue.
And so do you guys have the figures, the numbers that show where the hot spots are and how it is statewide, or not?
Not currently, not for this meeting. We don't have those numbers available.
Okay. But if we want to do that, do we have to do a FOIA to get that, or will you guys be revealing that information at some point while these workshops are going on?
I think it's something we can try to put together, I don't know how long it would take for us to try and gather that information and put it together.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Griggs, I see that your hand is raised.
Thank you. I know we're well over time, but try to be quick. So thinking about the test results that are not reported, if we're eliminating cultured tests, that will help that, correct? And that a cultured test can be done by a veterinarian somewhat in the field, and he or she may forget to turn that in. Can it be required of out-of-state labs to report to you as part of their accreditation process?
So we can't dictate their laws. However, we haven't had a significant problem with, I think it's more how they send the data. Sometimes they'll send us data and it doesn't say what it is on an email, or it's not clearly explained. So most of the labs have been supportive because they know it's a reportable disease, just like our lab is supportive of other states. When there's a positive, we inform them. But the problem with labs sending data is sometimes it's 2 days later. Sometimes it's automated at midnight and it gets kicked back and they don't see it. So ultimately it falls back on the vet, whether they're a vet in Idaho, Nebraska, California, their accreditation requires them to report that. And we have had issues with that. And again, with the culture, they just don't report the test or don't report the positive. So eliminating culture will be a huge improvement for sure. And then ideally working with those labs that we are having trouble getting reports, but ultimately we need to get in touch with those veterinarians and make sure that they remind them of the 48-hour rule for reporting. Because either way, we have to speak with the veterinarians to start the investigation. I can see a positive, but I want to know, is this a whole herd test? Are these all the bulls accounted for? Were they on open cows? So ultimately, we still need that contact with that veterinarian.
Thank you.
Jennifer Garrett, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes, I was wondering if you're having problems enforcing the current regulation, why do you feel that adding another regulation will be enforceable?
So the easy part about state annual testing is that we know they all have to test. Oh, sorry. Did I hear someone talk? No. So we know everyone is due. Again, we can look at the date, but we know everyone's due to test at a certain time. We know who hasn't tested. With the current regulations, like we talked about the culture, we don't even know they're being done at sometimes. Sometimes they're being done in the field and we don't even know they're being performed. No one's reporting that to us at all. Whereas even if you have a negative under state mandated testing, you have to tell us you had a negative. And that also ultimately helps with the investigations, because if I know so-and-so has a positive, but their adjacent herd, I know right away they had a negative, then I don't have to quarantine that herd either, because we know they tested after they were exposed and they were negative. So it makes that process smoother as well.
And how will you know who, will every rancher have to send in that they tested, or how will you know? Because right now you're not having the vets send in. So how will it work?
The veterinarians are required to notify us. So
But
we
they
will have.
aren't, right? You're having problems with that now, you say, correct?
Correct, because of the culture, yes.
Oh, I see. But with the PCRs, it'll be more, okay.
It's easier with the PCRs, yeah.
And then how will you know that everybody's done it with this new current law or proposed law?
We will have to match ranchers with our previous records, including previous trick tests, to make sure everybody's tested.
Perfect, thanks.
No more comments, Julia?
I do not see any more hands raised, no.
Okay. We can move on to the next section if you want them, Julia.
Okay. So we appreciate everyone's questions. We'll now move into public comment for anyone wishing to make a statement for record and consideration.
Okay. No public comment, Julia?
I'm not seeing any more hands raised, no.
All right. So at that point, then we'll close the public comment, and like to thank everybody for your participation today. NDA will take all the comments from today under consideration, along with any written comments that we received during the rulemaking process. Would like to thank everybody for their time and their input, and this workshop is adjourned as of 3:12 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you.